The sun was just beginning to rise over Eastmere when Wyatt Colton stepped out onto the balcony of the Frontier Line's main office. The air was cool and dry, carrying the faint smell of horse sweat and fresh hay from the stables below. He leaned on the wooden railing, his old ranger's eyes scanning the street. 2 iron road stagecoaches were rolling out of town, their heavy, iron-rimmed wheels clattering against the packed dirt. 6 horses pulled each one, and 4 armed guards rode alongside, 2 on the roof, 2 flanking the wagons. The stagecoaches were painted a deep, official green with the Iron Road logo emblazoned on the sides in gold. They looked sturdy, professional, slow. Wyatt didn't say anything at first. He just watched them go. Behind him, the office door creaked open. Kane stepped out, his cat ears twitching as he adjusted his satchel. Neera followed a moment later, her long blonde braids catching the morning light. She was already dressed for a ride. Leather coat, gloves, and that calm, unreadable expression she wore when she was thinking hard about something. "They're getting bolder," Kane said quietly, stepping up beside Wyatt. 2 full coaches in 1 convoy, that's new. "They're testing us," Neera replied. She rested her arms on the railing, blue eyes following the stagecoaches as they turned onto the main road heading west. "Seeing how much cargo they can move before we start undercutting them on price." Wyatt let out a low chuckle, the sound rough from years of shouting orders across windy prairies. "Let them have the heavy freight," he said. "We're not in the business of hauling furniture and mining equipment. We're in the business of getting the important stuff there fast. Mail, medicine, messages that can't wait." Kane nodded, but his tail flicked once, a small sign of irritation. Still, they're starting to look legitimate. People are starting to trust them. Neera glanced at him sideways. "Trust is earned on the road, not in boardrooms. Let them play at being a company. We're still the ones who built the actual routes." Wyatt smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed on the horizon. The stagecoaches were getting smaller now, dust rising behind them like a thin brown veil. "Keep an eye on them," he said, "and make sure our people know. We don't start fights with the Iron Road, but we don't back down from them either." Kane and Neera both nodded. For a moment, the 3 of them stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the eastern plains. The Frontier Line's blue banner fluttered on the flagpole above them, bright against the morning sky. Then Wyatt straightened up, rolling his shoulders. "All right, enough watching. We've got work to do." He turned and headed back inside, Kane and Neera following close behind. Rhett Colton hated waiting. He sat behind the heavy oak desk in the Central City Frontier Line office, boots crossed at the ankles and resting on the polished wood. The coin in his hand flipped lazily between his fingers. Up, down, caught, flipped again. The sound was the only thing breaking the quiet hum of the room. 3 days. 3 days of sitting in this chair, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and pretending he wasn't slowly losing his mind. The crew was scattered across the routes. And here he was, bored out of his skull. The office was nice, he had to admit. Central City did things with style. The walls were lined with dark wood panels and framed maps of the known routes. A large window behind the desk looked out over the bustling merchant district, where people in fine coats and practical leathers moved between stalls and storefronts. In the distance, the arcane spire rose above the rooftops, tall, slightly crooked, and glowing faintly with that strange blue light that never seemed to go out, even in the middle of the day. Rhett had never been inside the spire. He'd heard the stories, of course. Wizards who spent their lives studying old books and arguing about the nature of reality. Magic that was kept locked away like a dangerous animal. He'd always thought it sounded weird. The coin flipped again. He caught it, held it between 2 fingers, and stared at the worn surface. 2 days. That's how long it had taken him to make the run from Central City to Eastmere the first time, years ago. He'd been younger then, more reckless. He'd nearly killed himself and his horse pushing that hard, riding through the night, barely stopping to eat or drink. Wyatt had chewed him out for 3 straight days afterward, but the crew had celebrated like he'd won a war. Now he was older, smarter. He knew how to pace himself, how to swap horses at every fort, how to rest in short, disciplined bursts instead of collapsing at the end. He was still the fastest rider on the frontier line. That hadn't changed, but he didn't have to prove it anymore. The door to the office opened. Rhett looked up, expecting another clerk with more paperwork he didn't want to deal with. Instead, a tall man in crimson and gold stepped inside. A royal messenger, the kind that only came from the dual crowns. Rhett's boots hit the floor. The messenger approached the desk without a word and placed a heavy leather pouch on the polished wood. 2 wax seals held it shut, one bearing the mountain sigil of the Dwarven King, the other the dragon crest of the High Elven King. The pouch looked important, official, the kind of thing that didn't get handed to just anyone. "Colton? That's me." The messenger's voice was calm, professional. Priority diplomatic message from the dual crowns, addressed to the president of Eastmere. It must arrive within 2 days. No delays, no excuses. Rhett stared at the pouch for a long moment. 2 days. The old record. The one he'd set when he was young and stupid and willing to risk everything just to prove he could. He looked up at the messenger, and a slow, familiar grin spread across his face. "Well," he said, standing up and grabbing his coat from the back of the chair, "guess I'd better not keep their majesties waiting." The messenger gave a small nod. "The dual crowns specifically requested you. They said, and I quote, 'Send the one who doesn't know how to lose.'" Rhett laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Tell them I said thanks for the vote of confidence, and if I'm late—" He slung his travel bag over one shoulder and headed for the door. "I won't be." The door swung shut behind him. Outside, the streets of Central City were alive with the usual chaos. Merchants shouting, horses clattering, the distant ring of hammers from the Forge District. Rhett's horse, Storm, was already saddled and waiting at the hitching post, courtesy of the stable boy who knew Rhett's habits by now. He swung into the saddle, checked the pouch one more time to make sure it was secure against his chest, and kicked Storm into a gallop. The wind hit his face as they tore through the eastern gate and out onto the open road. 2 days. He could do 2 days. He'd done it before. But this time, he wasn't doing it to prove anything. This time, he was doing it because the dual crowns had asked, and because somewhere deep in his gut, he had a feeling this ride was going to matter more than any of them realized. The sun was high by the time Rhett reached the first way station east of Central City. It wasn't much, just a small wooden building with a corral and a water trough. But it was enough. He swapped horses without dismounting for more than a minute, tossing a few coins to the young stable hand who ran out to meet him. The kid looked like he wanted to ask questions, but one look at Rhett's face and the sealed pouch on his chest was enough to keep him quiet. Rhett was gone before the dust had settled. By late afternoon, the rolling hills of the eastern prairie stretched out around him, golden grass waving in the wind, the sky wide and endless above. This was the prairie, open and honest, the kind of land that made you feel small in the best way. He didn't stop. The horse he'd taken from the way station was a good one, strong, steady, with a smooth gait. Rhett let it set its own pace, only pushing when the trail opened up. He drank from his water skin, ate dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebag, and kept his eyes on the road ahead. By the time he reached Pony Fort, the sun was already dipping toward the horizon. The fort was one of the older stations on the route, a sturdy log fort with a tall watchtower and a corral that could hold 20 horses. Rhett had stopped here more times than he could count. The station master, a grizzled man named Harlan with a missing left ear and a permanent scowl, was already waiting by the gate when he rode in. "You're moving like the devil's on your tail," Harlan called as Rhett dismounted. "What'd you do this time?" Rhett grinned, tossing the reins to a stable hand. Priority run. Dual crowns to the Blue House. 2 days. Harlan raised an eyebrow. The closest thing he ever got to surprise. Dual crowns, huh? Both of them? Both of them, Rhett confirmed, already heading for the fresh horse that was being saddled. And I'm not stopping for tea and cookies. Harlan snorted, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. Colton, you planning to sleep at all, or are you just going to ride until you fall off? I'll sleep at Eagle Fort, Rhett said, swinging onto the new horse. I'm reckless, not stupid. Harlan chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Could have fooled me. Go on then, and try not to die before you get there. I'd hate to have to explain to Wyatt why his favorite idiot got himself killed on my watch. Rhett tipped his hat and kicked the horse into a gallop. The sun had fully set by the time he reached the edge of the Greenbelt forest. The change was immediate. The open prairie gave way to towering pines and ancient oaks, their branches forming a living canopy overhead. The air grew cooler, damper, filled with the rich smell of moss and earth. Moonlight filtered through the leaves in silver shafts, turning the forest floor into a patchwork of light and shadow. Rhett slowed his pace. Riding hard through the Greenbelt at night was asking for trouble. Roots, rocks, and low-hanging branches could end a ride in seconds. He let the horse pick its way carefully along the trail, the only sounds the creak of leather and the distant call of an owl. The forest felt ancient, timeless, like it had been here long before any of them. Before the frontier line, before the city-states, before the first humans crossed the Great Eastern River. Rhett had always loved this stretch. It made him feel small in a way that was strangely comforting. He rode through the night. Deep in the pre-dawn hours, long before the first light touched the sky, the trees began to thin, and Rhett could see the low rise of Eagle Fort ahead, its lights glowing warm against the darkness. His horse was lathered and breathing hard when they finally rode through the gate. A stable master, a young woman with short-cropped hair and a no-nonsense attitude, took one look at him and the state of his mount and whistled. You look like you've been dragged behind a wagon for 20 miles. Feels like it, Rhett admitted, sliding down from the saddle. I need a fresh horse at first light. And a bed. Any bed. The stable master nodded toward the main building. Mess hall's still serving. Get some food in you first. I'll have a horse ready at dawn. Rhett didn't argue. He ate quickly. Stew, bread, and a mug of strong coffee. Then found an empty bunk in the barracks and collapsed without even taking off his boots. The last thing he remembered was the sound of wind moving through the trees outside the window. Then he fell asleep like a rock. Rhett woke shortly before dawn. The barracks at Eagle Fort were still dark, the air cool and heavy with the smell of wood smoke and old leather. For a moment he lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of the other sleeping frontier riders. His body ached in places he hadn't known could ache, but his mind was clear, rested, sharp. He sat up, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and reached for his boots. By the time he stepped outside, the eastern sky was just beginning to turn from black to deep blue. The stable master was already waiting by the corral, holding the reins of a fresh chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. She's got good wind and steady legs, the woman said, handing him the reins. Don't push her too hard at first. She likes to warm up slow. Rhett nodded, swinging into the saddle. Thanks, I'll treat her right. He rode out of Eagle Fort as the first rays of sunlight touched the tops of the trees. The Greenbelt forest was behind him now. Ahead lay the open expanse of cowboy country, rolling golden prairie that stretched all the way to Eastmere. The air smelled different here, cleaner, wilder, like freedom and dust and distant rain. For the first hour, the ride was peaceful. The mare moved well beneath him, her hooves drumming a steady rhythm against the hard-packed trail. Rhett let her set the pace, only nudging her forward when the path straightened. He drank from his water skin, ate a piece of dried fruit, and watched the world wake up around him. Birds called from the scattered trees. A herd of wild horses grazed in the distance, tails flicking lazily. The sky was a pale, endless blue, streaked with thin white clouds that looked like they'd been painted there by some careless god. It was beautiful. And then he started noticing things. At first, it was just a feeling, a prickle at the back of his neck, the sense that something was off. He slowed the mare to a walk and leaned down, studying the trail. Hoof prints, dozens of them, fresh. Heading east, the same direction he was going. Rhett frowned. This wasn't unusual. Plenty of riders use this route. But these prints were clustered, tight, like a group moving fast and together. And they weren't the rounded, heavy prints of draft horses or the iron-shod hooves of stagecoach teams. These were lighter, faster, the kind of prints left by raiders who knew how to move quiet and quick. He straightened up, scanning the horizon. Nothing, just golden prairie and distant hills. He rode on. By mid-morning, the feeling had grown stronger. The hoof prints were everywhere now, not just on the main trail, but cutting across it from the north and south. Whoever they were, they'd been moving in groups, circling, scouting. Rhett's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. He didn't draw it, not yet, but he kept it close. The sun climbed higher. Sweat beaded on his forehead and ran down the back of his neck. The mare was breathing harder now, but still moving strong. Rhett reached down and patted her neck. "Good girl, just a little farther." That's when he saw the smoke. It was faint at first, just a thin gray line rising from somewhere far ahead, barely visible against the blue sky. If he hadn't been looking for trouble, he might have missed it. But he was looking, and the smoke was wrong. It wasn't the steady, controlled column of a campfire or a cook fire. It was scattered, uneven, like something was burning that shouldn't be. Rhett reined in the mare and stared. His gut twisted. He'd seen smoke like that before. Burning wagons, burning supplies, burning people who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He kicked the mare into a gallop. The prairie blurred past. Golden grass whipped against his legs. The wind roared in his ears. The sealed pouch against his chest felt heavier than it had any right to be. He rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The smoke grew thicker, darker, and then he heard it. Distant shouts, the crack of gunfire, the high, piercing whinny of a horse in pain. Rhett crested a low hill and pulled the mare to a sliding stop. Below him, maybe half a mile away, a wagon train had formed a defensive circle on the open prairie. Dozens of heavy wagons locked together, animals and people huddled in the center. Arrows rained down from all sides. Dark figures on horseback circled the wagons like wolves, firing and shouting. And in the very center of the circle, standing tall with a staff planted in the dirt, was a man in long robes and a pointy hat. A wizard. Even from this distance, Rhett could see the shimmering blue dome of light that rippled outward from the staff, covering the entire wagon train like a protective bubble. Arrows that should have killed shattered harmlessly against the magical barrier. Rhett stared. He'd never seen anything like it. The ward flickered. It was failing, and the dark elf raiders were closing in. Rhett made his decision in a heartbeat. He turned his horse hard to the left and rode off the main trail, cutting north across the open prairie. The grass whipped against the mare's legs as he pushed her into a hard gallop. The sealed pouch was still secure against his chest, but his mind was no longer on the dual crowns or the president of Eastmere. All he could think about was the wagon train, the shimmering blue ward, the arrows shattering against it, the dark elf raiders closing in like wolves. He rode for nearly 20 minutes before he saw it. A small log fort nestled against a rocky rise, just north of the main road. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. Horses moved in the corral. A blue flag with a single white star fluttered from the central flagpole, snapping in the wind. Eastmere Ranger Outpost 4. Rhett didn't slow down until he was almost at the gate. "Open up!" he shouted, reining the mare to a sliding stop. Dust billowed around them. "Attack! Wagon train under siege! Dark elf raiders! They've got a wizard! Some kind of magic shield! It's failing! People are dying! I need help now!" The two guards at the gate blinked at him like he'd ridden straight out of a fever dream. One of them, a young ranger with a patchy beard and a rifle slung across his back, stepped forward, hand resting on the stock of his weapon. "Slow down, stranger. What the hell are you—" "I said they're dying," Rhett snapped, already swinging down from the saddle. His legs were stiff from hours of riding, but he barely noticed. "There's a whole wagon train circled up maybe 5 miles south of here. Dark elves are picking them off like it's target practice. There's a wizard in the middle holding some kind of magic shield, but it's breaking apart. I need every man you've got, right now." The guard stared at him. Rhett realized he was breathing hard. His words were tumbling over each other in a chaotic rush. He forced himself to take a breath, but it didn't help much. "Sorry, I'm Rhett Colton, Frontier Line. I was riding priority from Central City when I saw the attack. I need to speak to whoever's in charge, right now." The guard exchanged a look with his partner, then nodded toward the main building. "Captain Crow's inside. Come on." They led him across the parade ground. Rangers were scattered around the fort, some cleaning rifles, some playing cards on a barrel, a few brushing down horses in the corral. A few looked up as Rhett passed, curious but not yet alarmed. The main building was a long, low log structure with a covered porch and a heavy oak door. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, gun oil, old wood, and leather. Maps of the eastern routes covered the walls. A large man sat behind a heavy desk, boots crossed at the ankles, reading a weathered book with a cracked spine. He looked up as Rhett entered. Captain Eli Crow was exactly what you'd expect from a frontier outpost commander. Mid-50s, weathered face lined from years of squinting into prairie sun, a thick graying beard, and the kind of calm that came from having seen too much and still being standing. He wore an olive drab coat with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and a blue armband with a white star was pinned to his left sleeve. A lever-action rifle leaned against the wall beside his desk. "Problem?" he asked, voice low and steady. Rhett opened his mouth and the words came out in a rush again. "Wagon train, 5 miles south, dark elf raiders circled up, wizard in the middle, blue shield, it's failing. People are dying. I need every ranger you've got, right now." Crow raised one eyebrow. "Colton," he said calmly. "Shut up." Rhett stopped. Crow closed his book, set it aside, and swung his boots off the desk. He stood up slowly, all 6'2" of him, and looked Rhett dead in the eye. His gaze was sharp, assessing, the look of a man who'd learned long ago that panic solved nothing. "Now," he said, voice still calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Explain, slowly, from the beginning." Rhett took a breath. By the time he finished, a small crowd had gathered in the doorway, rangers drawn by the raised voices and the obvious urgency. Crow listened without interrupting, arms crossed over his broad chest, face unreadable. When Rhett finally stopped, the captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to the gathered men. "Rifles, sabers, mount up. We ride in 5. The room exploded into motion. Lever-action rifles were grabbed from racks. Hats were snatched off hooks. Sabers were belted on with practiced speed. Men shouted to each other as they ran for the stables. Within seconds, the peaceful outpost had transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Boots pounding on wooden floors, horses being saddled, the metallic click of rifle actions being checked. Crow looked back at Rhett. "You riding with us, Colton?" Rhett nodded, already turning toward the door. "I started this. I'm finishing it." Crow gave a small, grim smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The general's not going to like this," he muttered, almost to himself. "Beaumont hates it when we ride out without orders, but he hates dead civilians more." He grabbed his own rifle from the wall, checked the chamber with a smooth motion, and followed Rhett outside. "Let's go save some people." Captain Elias Crow stepped out of the main building and onto the porch. The afternoon sun caught the silver in his beard and the hard lines of his face. Across the parade ground, the order he had given inside was already turning the outpost into a machine. Rangers converged on the stables, ammunition belts went over shoulders, and saddles were cinched down with practiced speed. Crow walked through it all with the unhurried stride of a man who had done this many times before. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply moved, and the Rangers moved with him. At the stables, his horse, a big scarred bay, gelding named Ghost, was already being saddled by a young ranger. Crow took the reins, checked the cinch with a practiced hand, and swung into the saddle in one smooth motion. Rhett was right behind him, mounting the chestnut mare he'd ridden in on. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He checked the revolver at his hip and the sealed pouch still secure against his chest. Crow glanced over at him. "You stick with me, Colton. No heroics. You're still carrying that message, and I'm not explaining to the Dual Crowns why their fastest rider got himself shot." Rhett nodded. "Understood." Crow turned his horse to face the assembled Rangers. 20 men now, mounted and ready, rifles resting across their saddles, eyes sharp. "We ride south," he said, voice carrying. 5 miles. Wagon train under attack. Dark elf raiders. The wagon train has a wizard holding some kind of shield, but it's failing. We break the circle, we drive them off, and we don't stop until the civilians are safe. Questions? None. Crow gave a single nod. "Then let's ride." He spurred his horse forward. The Rangers followed in a tight, disciplined column, hooves thundering against the prairie as they left the fort behind and turned south toward the distant column of smoke. The ride was fast and tense. Rhett rode alongside Crow near the front of the column, the wind roaring in his ears. The captain didn't speak much, just short-clipped questions. "How many raiders?" 20, maybe more," Rhett shouted back. "They were circling the wagons, shooting whenever the shield flickered." Crow nodded once, eyes narrowed against the wind. "Any idea what they want?" "No idea, but they're not playing around." Crow didn't respond. He just leaned forward slightly in the saddle, urging his horse faster. The smoke grew thicker as they rode, darker, more urgent, and then, as they crested a low rise, they saw it. The wagon train was still holding. Barely. The wizard's blue shield now hung in ragged, flickering sections over the wagons. Arrows were getting through. The dark elf raiders had tightened their circle, pressing closer while civilians dragged the wounded behind whatever cover they could find. Rhett's stomach twisted. They were almost out of time. Crow reined in his horse at the top of the rise, studying the scene with cold, calculating eyes. The Rangers formed up behind him, waiting for orders. The captain was silent for only a few seconds. Then he spoke. 2 groups. Left flank and right flank. We hit them from both sides and break the circle. No mercy. These bastards came here to kill civilians. We return the favor. Rhett, you stay with me. Everyone else, move. The Rangers split without hesitation, fanning out into 2 groups and spurring their horses down the slope. Rifles cracked. Sabers flashed in the sunlight. The sound of the charge rolled across the prairie like thunder. Crow glanced at Rhett one last time. "Try not to die, Colton. I'm not writing that report." Then Crow kicked his horse forward, and Rhett went with him, his 6-shooter raised. The Rangers crested the hill at a full gallop, 20 horses thundering down the slope toward the besieged wagon train. A single clear trumpet blast cut through the air. The old Eastmere cavalry call, sharp and unmistakable. It was the sound of help arriving when all hope was fading. Below them, the dark elf raiders were still circling the wagons, firing arrows whenever the wizard's blue shield flickered. The protective dome was weakening fast. Large patches of it had already vanished, and arrows were starting to find their marks. People screamed, horses reared. The situation was seconds from total collapse. Captain Crow raised his rifle. "Fire!" The Rangers opened up in a single devastating volley. Lever-action rifles cracked in rapid succession. Dark elves were shot off their horses mid-stride, tumbling into the grass. Others spun around in confusion as bullets tore through their ranks. Bows and arrows were no match for disciplined gunfire at close range. The raiders tried to counterattack, wheeling their horses and firing back, but the charge was too fast, too coordinated, and too brutal. Within moments, the circle was broken. Rangers poured through the gaps, sabers flashing as they cut down the remaining raiders or sent them fleeing across the prairie. The dark elves broke and ran, those who could still ride vanishing into the tall grass. A few tried to make a stand, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The fight was over in less than 2 minutes. Captain Crow rode straight through the shattered circle and into the center of the wagon train, Rhett right beside him. The air was thick with dust, smoke, and the metallic scent of blood. Wounded civilians were being helped to their feet. And in the very center of it all, a middle-aged wizard in torn robes stood with his staff still planted in the dirt, breathing hard. The blue shield was gone. The wizard looked up as Crow and Rhett approached. He was drenched in sweat, his face pale, and his hands were shaking. But he was alive. "Monty Quacklebush," Crow said, swinging down from his horse. "You look like hell." The wizard, Professor Monty Quacklebush, gave a weak, exhausted laugh. "Captain Crow, I was hoping you'd show up, though I was rather hoping it would be before my arms fell off." Rhett dismounted and stepped forward. Up close, the wizard looked even more worn out. His robes were singed, his hair was a mess, and there was a nasty cut across his forehead that had already started to crust over. "You saved a lot of lives today," Rhett said quietly. Monty waved a shaky hand. "Saved? I merely delayed the inevitable. If you and your trigger-happy friends hadn't arrived when you did, I'd be having a very awkward conversation with death right about now." He paused, then added with a tired grin, "Though I suppose I still might. I'm not entirely sure my legs are still attached." Crow snorted. "You'll live. Barely." The wizard looked at Rhett, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You're the one who rode for help. I remember you. From the hill." Rhett nodded. "Rhett Colton. Frontier Line." Monty Quacklebush studied him for a moment, then gave a small, genuine smile. "Well, Rhett Colton of the Frontier Line, you have my thanks, and the thanks of everyone here who isn't currently bleeding out." He glanced around at the wounded civilians being tended by the Rangers. "Though I suspect most of them will be more interested in thanking your friends with the loud guns." Rhett managed a tired grin. "They do tend to make an impression." Captain Crow was already moving, barking orders to his men as they secured the area and helped the civilians. A few Rangers were chasing down the last of the fleeing raiders, while others tended to the wounded and calmed the surviving horses. Rhett stood there for a moment, the adrenaline slowly fading from his system. He looked up at the sky. The sun was still high, but it had moved. He could feel the hours slipping away. He reached up and touched the sealed pouch still strapped to his chest. 2 days. He could still make it. Barely. The rescue had eaten every bit of margin he'd built into the run. If he left now, rode hard, and nothing else went wrong, he could still reach the Blue House inside the 2-day deadline. From here on, Every minute mattered. He looked back at Monty Quacklebush, who was now sitting on the ground with his back against a wagon wheel, eyes half closed. "You gonna be all right?" Rhett asked. The wizard waved him off without opening his eyes. "Go, deliver your message. I'll be fine. I have a very long nap scheduled, and I intend to keep it." Rhett hesitated for only a second. Then he turned, swung back into the saddle, and looked at Captain Crow. "I have to keep moving." Crow nodded once, understanding in his eyes. "Ride safe, Colton, and tell the president we said hello." Rhett gave a small salute, turned his horse east, and rode. The sealed pouch bounced against his chest with every stride. He still had time, barely. He rode hard across the final stretch of prairie, the wind roaring in his ears, and the exhaustion finally starting to catch up with him. His legs were numb, his back ached, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But he didn't slow down. Not yet. The skyline of Eastmere appeared on the horizon like a promise. It wasn't as grand as Central City, and it didn't have the exotic coastal flair of Michigan. Eastmere was something else entirely. A true human capital that had grown out of the frontier itself. Wide, dusty streets lined with a mix of sturdy wooden buildings and newer brick structures. Boardwalks ran along both sides of the main thoroughfare, crowded with cowboys, ranchers, merchants, and rangers in olive drab coats. The smell of horses, gunpowder, fresh bread, and prairie wind hung in the air. And rising above it all, standing proudly at the center of the government district, was the Blue House. It looked like someone had taken a presidential residence from the old stories and painted it with frontier pride. The tall columns that framed the entrance were a distinct, brilliant blue, the same shade as the Rangers' armbands. Atop the building, a massive blue flag with a single white star snapped in the wind, larger and prouder than any other flag in the city. A clock tower stood nearby, its hands ticking steadily toward evening. Rhett urged his horse faster. He passed the Frontier Line office on the way. Wyatt was standing outside on the porch, talking with Kane. Both men looked up as Rhett thundered past. "Rhett," Wyatt called, "you made it! We've got—" "Emergency handoff at the Blue House," Rhett shouted back without slowing down. "I'll catch up later." He didn't wait for a response. He just kept riding. The streets grew wider and cleaner as he approached the government district. People moved aside as they saw him coming. A dust-covered rider on a lathered horse, blue ribbons still tied to his arm, urgency written in every line of his body. Some recognized him. A few even cheered. Rhett didn't notice. He only had eyes for the Blue House. He rode straight up to the main gate, where two Eastmere Rangers in olive drab uniforms stood guard. One of them stepped forward as Rhett reined in his horse. "Rider?" Rhett nodded, too tired to speak. The guard looked at the sealed pouch on his chest, then at the state of him, and gave a small, respectful nod. "They're waiting for you inside. Follow me." Rhett dismounted on shaky legs and followed the guard through the blue-pillared entrance and into the cool, marble-floored halls of the Blue House. The contrast was jarring. From the dusty prairie to polished stone and high ceilings in a matter of seconds. They stopped outside a heavy oak door. The guard knocked once, then opened it. Inside was a large room. Two men stood near a wide desk covered in maps and papers. President Theodore Ted Walker stood with his hands on his hips, that signature mustache twitching as he turned. He looked exactly like the stories, broad-shouldered, energetic, with the unmistakable air of a man who'd rather be on a horse than behind a desk. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently very focused on Rhett. Beside him stood General Nathaniel Beaumont, tall and aristocratic, with silvering hair and the calm, commanding presence of a man who had won more battles than most people had seen. His uniform was immaculate, and his expression was unreadable. Both men looked up as Rhett entered. President Walker spoke first. "Ryder, you made it." Rhett stepped forward, pulled the sealed pouch from his chest, and held it out with both hands. "Priority message from the Dual Crowns," he said, voice rough from exhaustion. "Central City to Eastmere. 2 days." The president took the pouch, broke the seals, and glanced at the contents. His eyebrows rose slightly. He handed it to General Beaumont without a word. The general read it in silence, then looked at Rhett with something that might have been respect. "You pushed hard," he said quietly. "Most men would have taken 3. Rhett managed a tired grin. "I've done it before." President Walker let out a short, barking laugh and clapped Rhett on the shoulder, hard enough to make him stagger. "Damn right you have. And this time you brought something important. Well done, son." He turned to an aide standing nearby. "Get this man a hot meal, a bath, and a bed, and tell the Frontier Line office that their fastest rider just saved us a lot of trouble." Rhett started to protest. He still had to check in with the crew, but the president waved him off. "Rest first. That's an order. You've earned it." Rhett looked between the 2 most powerful men in Eastmere, then gave a small, exhausted salute. "Yes, sir." As he turned to leave, General Beaumont spoke one last time. "Colton." Rhett paused. The general gave him a small nod. "Welcome back." The morning sun was already high when Rhett walked into the Frontier Line head office in Eastmere. His body still ached from the ride, but after a few hours of sleep and a hot meal, he felt almost human again. Wyatt was already there, leaning against the big oak desk with a cup of coffee in his hand. Kane sat nearby, flipping through a stack of route reports. Nera was by the window, quietly sharpening her knife. And Brock was sprawled in a chair near the door, boots up on a crate, looking like he'd just rolled in from a long run. "Morning, hero," Brock said with a grin as Rhett entered. "Heard you had a bit of excitement yesterday." Rhett dropped into an empty chair and rubbed his face. "Something like that." Wyatt pushed a fresh cup of coffee toward him. "Tell us what happened." Rhett took a long sip, then started talking. He told them about the wagon train, the dark elf raiders, the circled wagons, the wizard in the middle holding that shimmering blue shield. He told them about riding for the Rangers, about Captain Crow and his men charging down the hill with the old cavalry trumpet ringing out. He told them about Monty Quacklebush, the exhausted, half-delirious wizard who'd kept an entire wagon train alive with nothing but stubbornness and old magic. Kane's ears perked up at the mention of magic. A real wizard from the arcane spire. "Yeah," Rhett said. "Name's Monty Quacklebush. Looks like he hasn't slept in a week and talks like he's half in another world, but he held that shield together long enough for us to get there." Brock let out a low whistle. "Damn, I leave for 2 days and you lot get all the fun." "You were at Wyatt's fort," Nera said calmly. "That's not exactly boring." Brock shrugged. "Merchant drama. Not the same as fighting dark elves and watching a wizard hold off an army with a stick." Wyatt chuckled, but his eyes stayed on Rhett. "You did good, son. Real good. The president's people already sent word. They're impressed." Rhett gave a tired grin. "Impressed enough to let me sleep in tomorrow?" "Probably not," Wyatt said, "but close." The door opened. All heads turned. Raven stood in the doorway, dust-covered and tired, her silver hair messy from the long ride. She looked like she'd been riding hard for days. Her green eyes swept the room, taking in everyone, and a small, familiar smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Well?" she said, stepping inside and dropping her mail satchel by the door. "Looks like I'm late to the party." Brock sat up straighter. "Raven, about time. We were starting to think you got lost in the Blackthorn again." Raven rolled her eyes and walked over to the coffee pot. "Mail route from the west ran long. Some idiot merchant decided to move his entire stock in one go and got stuck in a ravine. Took half a day to dig him out." She poured herself a cup, then glanced at Rhett. "Heard you had an exciting ride. Something about dark elves and a magic shield? Rhett nodded. Yeah, I'll tell you later. You look like you need that coffee first. Raven took a long sip, then looked around at the crew. Wyatt, Kane, Nira, Brock, and Rhett. All of them together in one room for the first time in weeks. She didn't say anything sentimental. That wasn't her style. But her smirk softened just a fraction. Good, she said quietly. We're all here. Wyatt smiled and raised his coffee cup. For now, at least.
One white star burning clear and bright. Saddle up, boys, hear the prairie call. Eastmere stands, and we got it all. Under the azure skies, riding over emerald plains, the olive drab ranges, right through dust and rain. From the old log forts to the rancher's gate, they ride that country just to keep you safe. Leather and steel rifle by the side, born around horses and raised to ride. Bald eagle circling where the wild winds blow, watching that prairie everywhere we go. When the smoke starts rising, when the warning comes, saddles get tightened and the old horn sounds. 20 horses thunder, feel the whole earth shake. The rangers are coming, better clear the way. Lone Star Nation flying its own flag, protected by horse and rifle, no need to brag. White star shining on a field of blue, when Eastmere calls, the rangers ride for you. Lone Star Nation, prairie born and raised, hoofbeats rolling through the dust and haze. From the blue house steps to the frontier line, horse and rifle standing side by side. Wide brim hats and a no-level gun, long days riding underneath the sun. Sabers hanging low, reins held tight, rangers on patrol from dawn till night. Wild horses running where the grass grows high, endless open country underneath the sky. Every fence post, every cattle trail, every lonely homestead knows they will not fail. There ain't much glory in a watchman's ride, just miles of country stretching far and wide. But if somebody comes looking for a fight, they'll see blue ribbons coming over the rise. Then the trumpet screams and the column turns, rifles come up and the powder burns. Sabers catch sunlight, horses find their stride. 20 mounted rangers coming down the hillside. Oh! Lone Star Nation flying its own flag, protected by horse and rifle, no need to brag. White star shining on a field of blue, when Eastmere calls, the rangers ride for you. Lone Star Nation, prairie born and raised, hoofbeats rolling through the dust and haze. From the blue house steps to the frontier line, horse and rifle standing side by side. Oh, roads remember every hoof that came before, every rider racing past an old fort door. Young men grow older, but the trail stays true, and that lone white star still still flies against the blue. No crown above us, no walls around the plains, just a horse beneath you and freedom in the reins. And somewhere high above the land, an eagle turns beneath the sun, watching over Eastmere until the riding's done. Mount up, rifles ready, hold the line, sound the horn, ride! Lone Star Nation, flying its own flag, protected by horse and ride. No need to brag, white star blazing on a field of blue. Eastmere Rangers coming straight on through. Lone Star Nation, cowboy countrywide, saber flashing, 20 horses side by side. Across the prairie, hear the battle cry. Rangers in the saddle underneath the open sky. Lone Star Nation, let the blue flag fly. Star Nation, keep that white star high. Horse and rifle, saddle and steel, guarding the prairie, guarding what is real. Oh, Lone Star Nation, bald eagle turning. Lone Star Nation, in the evening sky, blue flag waving, one white star, and the Rangers still ride.